Hello, coaches. Welcome back to another episode of Coach Better Spotlight. My name is Kim Capino, and I've worked with hundreds of teachers, coaches, and leaders in schools around the world to help them create thriving and sustainable instructional coaching programs. And I'm on a mission to help you coach better. Wherever you are in your coaching journey, we can support you. Come learn with me in one of our courses or private mentoring packages designed specifically for instructional coaches. Join our global Coach Better community, ask any questions you'd like to hear us answer, and find all of our resources for instructional coaches on our website at coachbetter.tv. You can also find us on social media at Eduro Learning or at our Coach Better Facebook group, and subscribe to our channel here on YouTube to catch all of our latest videos. Not sure where to start? Take our free quiz to get a tailored list of resources delivered straight to you and designed specifically for your level of coaching experience. Find it at coachbetter.tv/quiz. Today's episode is part of our special series featuring real-life coaching conversations with one of my amazing clients, Sara Wilkins, who at the time of recording had just graduated from our course for classroom teachers moving into a coaching role called Getting Started as an Instructional Coach. Huge thank you to Sara for being willing to record this session to share with all of you. Over the years, I've had many requests to see and hear what a coaching conversation looks like in practice. This can be really hard because for the most part, those conversations need to be private. It's hard to be vulnerable in a space that will become public. It's hard to have a conversation about challenges when you know others in your community could hear them. But Sara has very generously allowed us to record this coaching session so you can get a peek into what those conversations look and sound like. This is part of a series featuring coaching conversations, so if you like this one, keep your eyes peeled for the rest in this series. This episode is such a great example of the power of coaching and how a single coaching conversation can help you get unstuck. In this conversation, we talk about how Sara can bring her extensive training and experience to her role as a middle leader, how she can use her coaching skills to connect with others in the school community that have similar goals, how she can better understand the potential resistance to the work she's trying to do, how she can bring this conversation to a leadership level, how she might consider shifting her language to help others embrace a coaching mindset, and how she can use existing structures at her school to create a bridge to coaching. Before we jump into the call, I would like to invite you to look for the moments where I'm making decisions about how to navigate coaching stances, how I'm approaching every aspect of this conversation from a strengths-based perspective, how I'm supporting Sara in recognizing where she already has potential support structures within her existing school community, how the pacing of a coaching conversation and the intentional invitational aspect of that coaching conversation has a big impact on your coaching partner's ownership of the outcome, and how coaches are intentional about moving through the arc of a single coaching conversation. All right, Sara, welcome to the Coach Better podcast. I'm super excited to chat with you today.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Yay. Sara, we were just talking before the call about what you wanted to talk about today. And before we jump into actually what you want to talk about today, can you tell us a little bit about your journey as an educator, and then we'll transition right into our focus for today's conversation.
Sure. So it's kind of a funny journey into it. I didn't actually plan to be in teaching. It kind of just happened. I had wanted to be abroad and maybe do public health and things like that. So I had planned to do the Peace Corps when I finished college, and then I finished during the recession and didn't want to do Peace Corps with people who were doing it for the wrong reasons because they couldn't find a job. So I was like, you know what, let me find something else to do. And I'd spent a lot of time actually in college doing volunteer work in classrooms. And I applied for a job through the Career Center, and it was teaching in a bilingual school in the Dominican Republic. And I got the job and was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I was originally meant to teach second grade, and then last minute they changed me and put me in middle school. So I've been a middle school teacher ever since. And the first year in it, this is very much my personality. I was like, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this well. So I started, while I was doing the teaching, I started a master's in education and teaching online. And was doing those simultaneously because I was like, I want to do this well. I have to, serve these students well. And so that's kind of where it all started. And yeah, then I went back to the States to finish that master's and then moved to the American School in Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I worked for 6 years in a lot of different roles, some high school, EAL, and then social studies and humanities and tech integration, and then moved to London with my family, where I have been teaching in middle school.
That's an amazing adventure. I really appreciate the piece about planning to work in kind of maybe the nonprofit international kind of space, because that's also where I thought I might start as well. I didn't intend to be a teacher either. So connected with you right from that very first sentence there. And just before this call, we were talking about what you wanted to talk about today. So tell us a little bit about what you want us to focus on in this conversation.
Yeah, so in my current role, I am a social studies middle school teacher, but I also serve as the department head for the middle school, and I've kind of worked with the high school department as well, and we team up and do a lot of our meetings together. And in taking on this role, I've had some imposter syndrome, and I've been working through cognitive coaching, and I've wanted to bring this coaching model into the school where it doesn't really exist. And so I would like to bring the coaching in a way that works with the role that I'm in, and just trying to figure out ways to make that happen in a school where everybody is very busy and they're doing an amazing job in their classrooms, and it feels like something to add on to their busy schedule, and that it feels like a lot.
Yeah, and I think you're really not alone in this challenge. So I'm really excited for us to kind of talk through this. And we kind of named it as building a culture of coaching in a school where coaching doesn't exist yet, right? And there's so many schools that are in this place that have really enthusiastic and passionate educators like you that want to try to build this culture, but it just isn't there yet. So the first question I would ask you is like, what do you see as being a strength in bringing in any conversations around coaching, either a strength for you, a strength for your colleagues, or a strength for your school? What's something you can stand on with like a positive background?
Yeah, so the school has done a lot of pushing of adaptive schools work, which I think has been really great for pushing people in leadership roles to kind of do that work. And then I see it as going hand in hand with cognitive coaching. And several people have started getting trained in that, but a lot of them are in admin, and it hasn't completely trickled out into being more with teachers. And so I think in thinking of strengths, like the fact that our admin is familiar with this, and the fact that middle level leaders are using a lot of the adaptive schools approaches, which have, similar pieces around paraphrasing and pausing and posing questions in meetings. I think that that's a strength. I think that as I'm working through becoming trained in cognitive coaching and working towards becoming a trainer in it, that has been a strength, I guess, in my own practice, is getting to evolve and grow in that. And I'm still struggling to bring it into the school. So that's where the weakness is. But I think we have a lot of really great educators and really strong professional development kind of happening all over the place. And so I think that there is a space for coaching. It just doesn't exist yet.
Okay, so one key thing that I heard you mention just a second ago is that there are elements that they're bringing from adaptive schools that are kind of part of school culture already. Maybe this bit about paraphrasing, pausing, maybe intentionally kind of slowing down conversations to really ensure there's clarity. Some of those pieces are happening already. Would you say that's pretty consistent across the school? Would you say that's pretty accepted even in your department?
Consistency is hard because
Yeah, that's a bad question. I shouldn't have asked that because you can't really speak for everyone else. Let's speak just really for your department.
yeah. So we use in a lot of our department meetings and then team meetings that I'm involved in, and even the department head meetings, we use the adaptive schools template for, creating agendas and using an agenda. And so labeling different parts of the meeting as whether it's to inform or whether it's to discuss or have a dialogue or make decisions about something. And there will be, I think it's usually more, because not everyone is trained in it. There will be some people who function in that, okay, I'm taking the 30,000 foot view and now I'm going to paraphrase kind of what is being said, and then we'll kind of go from there. But not everybody will use all of those pieces in the conversations. Yeah.
And those people that already are kind of taking this on board, is there any potential to connect with them around how they feel this kind of adaptive schools work is developing in their setting, whatever that might be, like to have some positive interactions along those lines?
That's a good point. I think, yes, there could be some conversations around it and even some reflection on what works and what doesn't, because I know in working with different people in planning meetings, sometimes there's been we have different views on how you start a meeting. And like the adaptive schools approach, you start with that inclusion activity, and you're kind of building the community sense and that relationship. And I think that's really important, especially in meetings where you may only meet once a month, and so that relationship piece is not there always. And yet other colleagues are like, oh, it's a waste of time. Let's just move on and get into what we need to get into. So we could have conversations about what works and what's not working, about the what, why, how. In planning meetings, I definitely discuss that, but I think it could be something to discuss and share with other people as well, and see how we're all using it. So yeah, that's a good place to start.
I'm just thinking about, like, it sounds like there has been work done at the school, even though it's not all the way down the path of coaching that you kind of want it to go. So what are any ways, in addition to what we just talked about, that you could tap into the strengths, the positives, the things that are already happening? And so what I'm hearing you say is that there are some team members that maybe aren't loving it, but those that are, willing to have a conversation about it, you might be able to pull out those positives.
Yeah, I think that there would be a space for pulling out the positives, kind of discussing it, and maybe even getting some reflection from people who are in the meetings as well, to say, do you appreciate that we start with an inclusion activity, or do you appreciate that we structure the agenda this way, and let you know kind of what is happening and what the expectation is of whether this is going to be a discussion or dialogue or just informing you that this is happening, those kinds of pieces. Because I think in some ways it has just, the agenda itself is just a cultural piece. Like there's an expectation that when you come into a leadership role here, you're using them, and those are shared out. So I do think there's a space for reflecting on it and then pulling out the positive. So what are we liking about it, and how do we then move forward and push those pieces a little more? Oh, okay, maybe we're not paraphrasing that much. Why not? What's the value of paraphrasing? Do we see it as adding value to a meeting? And then how do we make it more a part of what we're doing as leaders in the meeting if we do find it valuable? Those sorts of things. Yeah.
Yes. So there could be an opportunity to pull out the positives, to share with others, and to identify what ways you could leverage what's already happening. So that's like three concrete, but we came to that very quickly. There's like three concrete things that you can start with. Then the next question I'm wondering about is, you mentioned that there are some of your colleagues that are like, I want to skip this, regarding the inclusion activity, that they just want to get down to business. And I'm excited that we had so many positives real quick, but I want to just take a look at what might be their hesitation, their resistance, their lack of interest in going through this experience like an inclusion activity. And my understanding of an inclusion activity is it's like quick. It's not like half your meeting. So tell me a little bit about what's going on that side of things, where you're facing a little bit of resistance.
It's a good question, because I think that they are seen in so many different ways. I think a lot of times in meetings that I will be in when we use them, it will be used as there will be this fun question, even kind of the question you started with, how did you get into teaching? Or, if you weren't a teacher, what would you be doing? So we'll ask kind of fun questions and then kind of go around and have everybody answer out loud. And if people start to all tell these personal stories, depending on what the question is, it does end up taking a longer time. And so when we've, in some of the meetings, if we've combined a department group, we've got 20 plus people. And so we don't really have the time to go around and share that. In smaller meetings, absolutely, you can kind of build that personal connection through that bigger question. But so I have tried, and I know others have tried as well, to do different ones. So sometimes it'll be 4 pictures on the board, talk with somebody next to you about which picture represents how you're feeling today. And then it's just a quick share, and then maybe a couple people, more like a partner share, and then sharing out from a few people. And so it's very quick, 5 minutes, and then moving on. So I think that not being in meetings where that's happening, maybe it becomes this thing is going to take half our meeting now. And I guess it's also up to whoever is leading the meeting to recognize how much time they have to play with for that inclusion activity. And that always maybe isn't considered.
So hearing that there are people that are on board and would like to reflect on the process, and you might be able to pull out some positives, could you also take this potential resistance and have a conversation around that with those people, and maybe even the people who are also feeling a little bit of so you validate their concerns?
Yeah, I think so. And I think in the meetings where I've kind of built a meeting together with somebody else, we've had those conversations and come to that compromise where I've kind of pushed and said, well, I do think that it's valuable, but I don't think it needs to take so long. We don't need to hear from every single individual. It can just be building a relationship with someone you're next to, or, getting people to move around and talk to 3 different people and then sit down, and it's really quick. And so that, I think, was a win in that context. And I think that being able to have that conversation, even at kind of a leadership meeting, would also be powerful to get us all thinking outside the box of how we could be doing different things, or doing these things in the meeting a little differently, and make it work. If we see the shared value in wanting to start a meeting with building the positive relationships, or whatever the other pieces of the meeting we might kind of wrestle with are.
Yep. So that brings me to, I think, what is the meatier question is, how would you feel potentially raising that conversation at a department head meeting? Like, how would you feel? What would need to be in place for you to feel confident in having that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I haven't thought about it before, obviously. So this is, we don't always, as department heads, kind of bring our ideas or things to the table before a meeting like this. So I think it would just be talking to the different leaders who run the meeting, and just being able to go and speak and say, hey, I was thinking about this. Is this something we could have a conversation about? And yeah, just going from there, and potentially volunteering to kind of lead the conversation to take it off their plate.
Does that feel like something that you would like, that feels within your realm of confidence, or does that feel like you still need to do some more preparation to feel like to go and approach them and say, this is something that has come up, I'm curious, can we have this conversation? Does that feel like something you feel comfortable doing, next week, or is that something that needs additional planning strategy?
Yeah, I don't think that I don't think it should take a lot of time. I think just kind of looking over what the essential pieces of an adaptive schools meeting are, and then bringing that question, and then I don't think it would be too challenging to do. Whether I get a yes or no is the
different
piece.
Story,
but yeah.
Yes. So then that's a good next question to think about, is like, what might you need to ensure that you get that yes? And what we were just talking about earlier, it's connecting me to what we were talking about earlier, which is like, maybe there are others who are really interested in kind of continuing to develop this. And maybe I have a suggestion. Can I offer a suggestion? Sorry, I know we're coaching and I shouldn't be just offering suggestions, but I'm wondering if you were able to have conversations with some other heads of departments who are also on board with this line of thinking, if it isn't just you that approaches the person that's running the team, but it's like the three of us had this conversation and we were wondering, could we do this? Because that's so much more impactful than just one person asking.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier. Like, are there people you could have conversations with about this? And so definitely I could go and talk to other people. How are you running your meeting? Are you finding this? Yeah, have those conversations about it first and then see what the need is to bringing it to the whole meeting. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I feel like that's like one piece is like you're coming at this from a strengths asset-based approach that the school already has some good infrastructure in place for having these conversations. But there's a big leap from the way we facilitate meetings to building a coaching culture. Like that is not like first we have one and then the second one just falls. It's not dominoes, right? So I'm wondering when you think about having coaching conversations in your setting that are more like the conversation we're having now, are there any potential strengths that you see around that? Are there any teachers who or colleagues of any in any area that are like open to having this kind of conversation? Or is it really like, no, that's not our school culture?
No, I definitely think that there are people who would be open and willing to have a coaching conversation. With the cognitive coaching, I had people kind of reach out and say, yeah, I'm interested in trying it. I had tried to implement it as part of like my role as department head with my team as well, but it became, because we don't have a culture of people understanding what it means, just cognitive coaching is, that it was hard for people to separate like that it was evaluative, even though that's not my role as department head at all. Yep. And those pieces. So there are people who are interested and who I think are those kind of early adopters, but then it's also an issue of time and finding space in our schedules that works and making it kind of a priority because some of them were eager to say it to me, but we haven't booked a time, or the times I gave weren't compatible with their calendar. And so then it's trying to figure out what works for everybody and make that happen.
So we know time is a fact. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. And then deciding like what kind of conversation it is. Is it the cognitive coaching style, or is it just a kind of what all of these other kind of instructional coaching styles would be?
Yep. So time is a factor. People's priority level is a factor. Mm-hmm. Given how well you know your school, you've been there for a little bit of a while now, what could help shift either the like on the time side or the priority side? What are some things that you know about your school culture, about these people who might be willing to engage in a conversation like this with you, that you could try to remove those barriers in some way?
Yeah, I think that I think time is the biggest factor. And so just finding time in my busy schedule and in theirs. And so making myself available perhaps at different, more, as much time as I can. And then just really maybe pushing the issue of like, we're going to find a time. Let's get this scheduled for those people who are interested in it, I think would be the first easy kind of step to pushing for it to happen.
So here's maybe I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to ask you maybe a dumb question, but I want to see if this is helpful in any way. I know you want them to make time and make it a priority, but the question I'm wondering about, do you know these colleagues well enough to know how a coaching conversation of any kind could solve a problem for them, or could specifically help them in a certain way, so that instead of asking them to like do you a favor and try something out with you, is there a way you could potentially present this to them as a way to solve a specific problem you know that they're having, or a specific challenge you know that they're having?
Yeah, I think so. I think that could be a way to approach it, but I don't know that I would I don't think I would approach it with, hey, I know you have this problem. Let's chat
No,
about it.
probably
But,
not.
uh, but I think that it could be the way that I sell it. Like, hey, we all have, problems and issues and challenges. If there's anytime you want to schedule to talk through it, I'm just here to listen and help you process. And that could be helpful. Yeah. For getting started.
And are these people in your department?
Some are, and then some are just friends.
Friends?
Yeah.
Because I'm just
I
wondering, like,
interested in being coached. There's a few who are like, oh yeah, this sounds cool. But yeah.
because I was thinking that if it's in your department, you might know shared department-based problems. And so you could specifically say, like, hey, we just talked in the department meeting about this. I'm wondering, do you want to sit down for 20 minutes and go through it together and I'll do it and let's do it in a coaching style and see how it works.
Yeah. That is, I think, a way to do it for sure. I think one of the challenges is people understanding the role of coaching and what it can do. Even when I've explained it, it's still not clear that we can talk through a problem and you're not being judged on it, and there's nothing evaluative, and there's nothing off limits or out of bounds in terms of you being able to process through something. But I think there's kind of that fear of judgment, or fear of processing to get in a way that, oh, maybe I have a realization I'm doing something wrong and I need to change something. And that's totally fine in a coaching conversation, obviously. But I think that's a little harder here. I think that is something in the culture that because we all are doing really well. And then
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it the name? Is it the word coaching?
Maybe. Yeah. Now that you say that, that could be a factor in feeling like I'm not doing something well. I need to be coached on it.
Because that
Could
is not that would not be an unusual thing for there to be baggage around the word coaching, either from this current school, something that happened at some point in the past you may or may not know about, or from experience from other teachers coming from other schools and bringing that perspective on coaching with them, or even just the concept by itself. So you're not in a position to really fully change the whole school conversation around coaching right now, because you aren't in that role. You're in a head of department role. You're in a teaching role, but you could begin to shift the perception around coaching with those individuals that are kind of willing to take a step with you. And maybe the language you use around that conversation is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that makes sense, especially with different people who I don't interact with on a regular basis, and who might be interested, but also a little hesitant because of the language. Yeah. So thinking about other things to call it.
Yes, that's what I'm wondering. Like, what works in your setting? Feels safe? What feels professional? What feels like, the teachers who are doing really well that everybody wants to be like? What words do they use? What language comes out in those kinds of conversations?
Yeah, that's what I can't think of what would be a better word than just saying it's coaching. Because support and everything sort of is just a synonym and means essentially the same thing.
How do people work together? How do they like to collaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like collaborative. People work a lot of times in teaching teams collaboratively. So you're kind of working with your teaching partner or teaching, or maybe a few other people, depending on the size of the team, and then you're building your curriculum and sharing ideas and just collaborating together. So maybe it's a collaborative conversation or something. Yeah. I don't know.
Is there
Trying
any
to
way
think.
you could find out? Like, how could you uncover what kind of language feels safe for teachers?
I could ask. I could talk to people who I have coached with and from last year a little bit, and then I could, yeah, just ask. Just see, is it the word coaching? Because maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's not,
Yeah.
and maybe it's time, or maybe it's something else, and I can just ask. Yeah.
And I think once you know some of the really concrete obstacles that are not, and I'm not saying this word to be like pithy, but like not excuses, that like this the real genuine concern. It's yes, time is always a concern, but like actually, what are you really worried about? Because obviously you find time to do other things. So like, what is it that in what
Yeah.
way is the perceived value of this conversation not worth your time? Like, I think that's the question you want to find out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tend to think that it's and maybe it is the wording, but I also think it's a misunderstanding, or just I don't know what that is. And I don't have time to figure out what it is to see the value for me.
Yes. What do you think teachers really do value at your school?
I mean, I think that people really are passionate about what they're doing every day in the classroom with kids, and they really care about doing their best and supporting students and working and supporting their colleagues. So I think that there's uh, value in kind of the hard work that everybody is doing and putting in every day, and the sort of high expectations of learning that we have for the students.
How could you make this about the students and not about the teacher?
Mm. Yeah, I think that maybe an idea I've had has been modeling a coaching conversation to show people what it can be about, and then it can kind of, because if the coaching conversation goes into that world of talking about, a challenging situation with a student, or a challenging lesson, or something that you're planning for, whether it's like the reflection, or whether it's the planning side of, I'm planning for this and I know that I've got some students who need XYZ, that maybe people could then see the value of it, because that's one side. The other side is just kind of talking honestly about, we all are reflective teachers. We're all valuing the process, and nobody is kind of repeating the exact same thing this exact same way every class to class or year to year. We're always changing and evolving and improving it. So how might having these more open conversations with people, not just our teaching team, be valuable to us learning and growing together?
Ooh, that's a big swing. I like it. Okay, so one more thought on this plan. When we're thinking about making it about the students rather than making it about the teacher, because what I'm hearing you say is there may be resistance to the concept of coaching. We're not sure, but for sure it's not something that people are like super excited about. So like they're not jumping for joy, and there also may be some level of resistance. Then we've got a school setting like the high performing schools where, you know, people are doing a good job and they feel confident that they got hired at this school and they're doing good work, and they don't necessarily need to have a lot of hand holding. Like they know what they're doing, they get it, right? But those people absolutely love to hear how their students are doing, and you articulated that so beautifully just a few minutes ago about how passionate teachers are about thinking about their students and doing the work for their students and making sure the work that is provided for students is the work they want students to be doing. So I'm wondering, rather than talking about the coaching conversation, how can you just talk about the students? What ways do you have to start a conversation about students in someone's individual classroom that could potentially like eventually roll into a coaching conversation? And I do have some ideas, but I'm wondering if you have a thought already in your mind.
I mean, what came to mind as you said it was just asking questions about it. And I think that, I don't know, creating some space in a department meeting where we are able to just talk about like how, think about the last lesson you taught. How did you know that students were meeting the goals, the objectives of the day? And what evidence did you have of that? And what do you feel like just kind of asking those questions,
Yes.
but on a more broad sense. So everybody's doing the reflecting together as a group, but at a personal level for themselves.
Do
So
you
it
think
doesn't,
that would work well in your department?
maybe. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it. Almost, it feels like group coaching in a
It
sense.
is. That would
Yeah.
be group coaching. Yes, absolutely. But what a great way to start a conversation about students and student learning in a setting that is technically removed from the classroom in when you aren't normally necessarily talking specifically
Yeah.
like that.
Mm,
I have another idea slash thought. Would you like to hear it?
absolutely.
Have you ever done anything where you are visiting another person's classroom and sharing what you see or notice in the room? Do you ever do learning walks, lab site visits? I'm very familiar with looking for learning from fieldwork education. Do you ever do anything like that?
We do have kind of pop in. We have I forget the name we use for it, but we used to do it as a bingo board, and so you were trying to go and see different classes, and now we're switching it up this year to make it a little more intentional of going to colleagues observing colleagues and trying to go in and see different work. Yes.
And you are
So
observing the other colleague. You're not observing the kids
you're just observing kind of
in the
the
classroom.
whole classrooms, like everything that's going on. But yes, saying colleagues observing colleagues does sound like you're just watching the teacher, but you're watching the whole interaction.
Okay, so I have an idea so I love your group coaching like as a way to kind of start a conversation, and even if that's all it is a 10-minute reflection, and somehow you structure it, where they're talking to each other. I don't know how big the group would be that you would do this in, but like they have a little mini kind of group coaching experience with you, then that's another easy thing to follow up on later and say, hey, did you enjoy that kind of process? You want to have another conversation like that? Don't need to tell anybody it's coaching, just do it, right? But the other thing I'm wondering about is if you have this observing colleagues process, and it's already somewhat normalized to go into someone else's classroom. One of the things that I learned from fieldwork education from this process called looking for learning is asking students about their learning and sharing directly what students say with absolutely no feedback or judgment on your part is like the absolute best start to a coaching conversation. It works so well, especially when teachers don't know why would I want to do this? Like, how could this help me? If you go in and you're doing a colleagues observing colleagues and you actually sit down and you talk to 5 or 6 kids and you say, oh, it was so great to come and see you in your classroom, something with a kind of a growth mindset phrasing, like I can really tell how much preparation you put into that lesson. It was so clear, the instructions, whatever. And then say, I talked to a couple kids, this is what they said.
Huh. Yeah. So using the data directly from them. Yeah.
Do you think people would think that's weird in your setting, or do you think they would be like, oh, that's interesting?
I don't think they would think it was weird. No, I think, yeah, they'd probably find it interesting to hear what students were saying. I don't know. How do you then use that and kind of lead it into coaching conversation and not just, oh, that's cool, and then we're done?
So imagine another teacher comes into your classroom and they were doing a colleagues observing colleagues, and they followed up with you later and they said, oh, I sat at this table, I talked to so-and-so, I sat at this table, I talked to so-and-so, I sat at this table, and they tell you 5 or 6 things. And like one of those things, you're like, uh-oh, that's what they thought was happening in the lesson. I think most teachers, not all, and I understand that your context and kind of what we're talking about here, but most teachers would be like, gosh, I can't believe, Melissa didn't get what we were talking about there. And then that's a perfect opportunity to just ask another question. And
Yeah.
I think if you are open to the potential of what the data can present for the teacher and just continuing to ask questions, it's just a natural, like it's almost a little bit in problem solving mode, but it's just kind of a natural, like, how is it possible that these three kids all understood what we were doing, but this kid was totally off on left field? How did that happen? Or, oh, that's so and so. They're always on their own. Whatever the things that we say, because we all know our kids so well. But I'm wondering if that could propel some reflection on the teacher's part that might prompt a follow-up conversation, whether it's right there in that moment or later on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that that's a good way to think about trying to do it. I think with that timepiece, if I was making the connection with them at that moment to share it, it would almost, if it was going to lead into a coaching conversation, kind of need to probably happen then. I could see it. I think that maybe that's my imagining of it, and maybe that's not how it would be, but I think that sometimes we're such a big machine that it feels like I don't see all of the colleagues that I'm wanting to have these conversations with all the time. Like even the people in my department, we have our teaching teams grade level to grade level, but I can go kind of from meeting one month to meeting the next month without really seeing them much. There's no kind of shared space that we're all mingling in or seeing each other in regularly.
And you mentioned there was a couple of teachers who were willing to have a coaching conversation with you, but they couldn't quite find the time. Is there any way you could combine these two things where you do a colleagues observing colleagues with them and then say, hey, I loved being in your classroom. I got some really interesting feedback from your kids. Is there a time we can sit down and talk about it? And I know that's being a little bit of a trickster, but like, could you combine the fact that there are a couple that would consider having a conversation with you as opposed to just like any old random person, but like be targeted?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to do it. And I also think I could even have a pre-conversation with some of them to say, hey, I'm going to plan during this time to come and see your class. Is there anything you want me to look for? So then data collection is kind of intentional for them, and it kind of completes the cycle in a sense. If
you did that, how would they feel?
Well, I would love to do that whole like pre and post cycle thing. And it's something I had thought about bringing and doing with all the people in my department this year, and then haven't really had the courage to kind of get it started fully. But I think that for those people who are already interested in coaching, that it would be a way for them to see what it's all about, to see what it can be, and, to hopefully find value in it.
Okay, so we have a lot that we just talked about in this conversation, and I want to sum up this little piece and then do the whole conversation. And what I think we just kind of talked about for the second part of that conversation is we know that there are a few colleagues that are willing to potentially try to do something related to coaching with you, but as of yet, it hasn't really happened. But you also have this great structure that already exists in your school, colleagues observing colleagues. And so this could be a bridge to that coaching conversation. And it could even be a step into a more coaching cycle process that in my advice, given everything you said today, I probably wouldn't call it that, but like more of a cycle with that teacher where you might say, hey, I'd love to come in and do colleagues observing colleagues in your classroom. And I'd love to just chat with some students while I'm there. Is there anything you want me to say, do, ask, look for, whatever? And that starts the conversation around having a professional conversation with them, focused on the students rather than focused on them as teachers.
Yeah. And I think it also prepares them. Like we do this, but I think people are still sometimes a little surprised, like, oh, what are you doing in here? And so they would know. And they're fine with it. Everybody's fine with it, but they do kind of have to have a moment of hesitancy because there's kind of, we do it during a certain period of time in the year it's designated. And gotcha. This would give a chance for them to kind of know that I'm coming or that anyone's coming, and then think about what they might want to have observed. And it does give that space to have a follow-up for sure.
And how many people do you think would be a reasonable, like, is one person enough for you to feel like you've tested this out? Or would you want to try, well, like 2 people or 3 people? Like, how does that feel?
I have like 2 people in mind who have talked to me about wanting to try coaching that I could definitely jump and do this with first. And then I could also kind of offer it as something for a few others too. But if I could successfully do it, maybe with one or two, that would be helpful. Yeah.
So that seems like a super concrete goal. You have a potential colleagues observing colleagues round of however that is structured at your school. You have two people who you feel like probably would be open to this kind of conversation. And now you have a frame to transition what we're calling a coaching conversation, but really making sure that it's focused on students and what students are saying and what students are doing and the student learning that's happening in the classroom. So there's a little bit of relief of the stress or the fear that they will be evaluated, or that it's, really about how good of a teacher they are. It's more about, as a teacher, we know we want to meet the needs of our students in our room. Let's look together at how we can make sure we're doing that. Yeah. Oh, I'm excited. I can't wait to hear how that goes. Okay, so we talked about two big things in our conversations today. We talked about building from a foundation of strength in your school with all of the current existing structures around adaptive schools, and potentially using that to leverage a larger scale conversation around the facets of adaptive schools that could potentially start working their way into coaching very lightly over time. So we've got like the leadership level piece kind of starting to think about. And then we've also got the individual teacher level piece. And it's okay that it's only two teachers. It doesn't matter. All you need is success with one person to say, oh, that worked. I'm going to try it again. So one person is great. Two people is even better. And then you've got that kind of individual level piece there. So our whole focus for this conversation was building a culture of coaching in a school where it doesn't exist. And I think we're looking at addressing that from two different layers, just from this conversation that we had here. How does that feel? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that it's really helpful because I have some action items to take away and think about implementing kind of right away as we get back. And I think that it gives me a framework for starting instead of continuing to stay stuck of thinking, I don't know what to do and where to go.
Excellent. Yeah. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. I will ask you my question that I always ask every time I do a coaching call, which is, what was most helpful for you in our conversation today?
Well, thank you for your time. I'm very excited about everything we talked about, and just to get to do this with you. But I think that it was helpful to think through the two pathways you just outlined of, thinking about it from that leadership realm of like how we're leading meetings and using adaptive schools to lead into more coaching. And then also from the more personal level of, I do have this opportunity to go in and use this data. And so why don't I use that as the kind of door to go through for starting some of the coaching conversations that otherwise I haven't made the time for, and I haven't, found the structure for, and this would make it be more intentional and more purposeful. And yeah, I think it's helpful to think about that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks for watching this conversation with Sara. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that as you listened, you can see how a single coaching conversation can help you get unstuck. As Sara highlighted at the end of the call, she now has tangible steps forward to empower her to go from inaction to action. One of the great things about having a conversation like this is being able to see your existing environment with fresh eyes. Sara mentioned after we stopped recording that she wouldn't have thought to use colleagues observing colleagues as the impetus to take action. And not only is the context appropriate, but the timing is perfect, with the next cycle starting up the following week after our conversation. The thing I really appreciate about this conversation is that we were able to start from a foundation of strength at every stage of the process, and that we approached her complex challenge, building a culture of coaching in a school where it doesn't exist, from two angles, leadership and grassroots. This is the kind of system thinking that we do in the Coach Certificate and Mentorship Program. There is always an individual pathway forward. And if you are the kind of person that is passionate about instructional coaching and you want to find that pathway so you can build a coaching culture in your school setting right now, please come join us in our courses for coaches. And if this conversation resonated with you in particular, come join us for the Coach Certificate and Mentorship Program, because building these kinds of structures and finding these kinds of pathways is exactly what we do inside the Coach. We have 3 different options for your professional learning, and each of our 3 global cohorts help you take the next step in your coaching, either as a brand new coach moving from classroom to coach and getting started as an instructional coach, which is the course that Sara took, or as a current coach or an educator who's being really intentional about building a coaching program in their school, in the Coach Certificate and Mentorship Program, or as an experienced coach who's ready to lead in our course, Coaches as Leaders. Find all the details for each course at coachbetter.tv/learn. And if you're not sure which course is right for you, watch one of our free workshops for instructional coaches designed specifically for your level of experience, so you can take your next step in your learning right now and uncover which course might be right for you next. You can find it all at coachbetter.tv/learn. Wherever you are in your coaching journey, we can support you. If you're curious right now and you have questions, please reach out. You can leave a comment here on YouTube or on the show notes on our website at coachbetter.tv. You can join our Coach Better Facebook group, or you can find us on social media at Eduro Learning and send me a DM. I'd love to support you on your coaching journey. See you next time.